Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching today's April presentation, our monthly webinar. Welcome. My name is Lexi. I am joined by Jen and Emma, who will be presenting the environment and you. We'll be discussing the role that the surrounding environment has on the health of individuals and the community. And environmental conditions are considered a social determinant of health, meaning that the natural and the built environment are non-medical factors that still directly impact health outcomes. And environmental conditions such as water quality, air quality, and weather often vary among populations and geographic locations. And while many conditions of the environment are naturally occurring, the quality of the environment is often affected by historical, economical, and socio-political factors too. As said before, to ensure we are all on the same page with definitions, the environment is the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we eat, and the places where we live, work, and play. And generally, we can break out the environment into two main categories. And if you've already guessed what those two categories are by looking at this slide, it is natural and built environment. The natural environment refers to all living and non-living things that occur naturally. Some examples include all plants, animals, soil, rocks, the atmosphere, air, and water. And in contrast to the natural environment is the built environment. Built environments are where humans have fundamentally changed landscapes, such as urban settings or agriculture, and examples of built environments include our homes, office buildings, and infrastructure like streets, bridges, trains, power lines, that sort of thing. And although we can split the environment into these two labels, the natural and built environment are constantly interacting with each other. For example, water that is initially supplied from a naturally occurring river travels through water lines, pipes, and fixtures to reach consumers. Along the way, that water can be contaminated by lead service lines or old copper pipes, and this is just one example of how a natural resource interacts with a built environment. And there is a proven relationship between the environment and the health of individuals and communities. More than 12 million people around the world die every year because they live or work in an unhealthy environment. Environmental pollutants are associated with poor health outcomes like asthma and COPD, heart disease, some types of cancer, developmental delays from exposures like lead poisoning, and other problems like high levels of noise, odor, or light that can impact your daily well-being and quality of sleep. And worldwide efforts to promote environmental health involve reducing people's exposure to these harmful pollutants in air, water, soil, food, and materials in homes and workplaces. And certain populations are more susceptible to poorer environmental conditions and associated health disparities, including communities of color, those with low incomes, those who are unhoused, older adults, pregnant women, and children. And if you consider where buildings like power plants, wastewater treatment facilities, and other sources of pollution are located, you'll realize that they're often in urban, lower income areas. And this is not an accident. And it further contributes to the negative health outcomes that marginalized communities in the US are already experiencing. And many aspects of the environment are expected to fluctuate with climate change, which is characterized by those rising temperatures and shifting weather patterns across the globe. And as a result, climate change is expected to cause new and worsening public health challenges, especially among disadvantaged communities. So how am I affected? As you saw in the title, this webinar is The Environment and You. So we're going to discuss the environment's impact on the individual health in greater detail by using our 5 senses as a lens.
All right, so we're going to look at sight first. The ozone layer is Earth's quote-unquote sunscreen, if you will, and it protects living things from too much of the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. However, the emissions of the ozone depleting substances like certain gases and spray aerosols, all of those have been contributing to damage to the ozone layer over time. If the ozone layer was missing completely, millions of people would develop skin diseases. The depletion of the ozone layer has contributed to the increased rates of skin cancers like squamous cell carcinoma and melanoma over the past 3 decades in the United States. In addition to impacting skin health, a loss of the UV protection can also be detrimental and affect our eye health. There's a strong association between ultraviolet radiation exposure and damage to the eye's lens, such as cataracts. This is why it's especially important to ensure that your sunglasses, no matter how cute they may look, have 100% UVA UVB protection. Sometimes also you'll see that labeled as 100% UV 400. While the EPA has taken national and international action to regulate ozone depletion and the substances that lead to depleting the ozone, it's important to take strong protections against the sun to maintain your health, especially when you're areas closer to the equator, which are most affected by the depleting ozone layer. All right, and smell. Unpleasant odors can be a warning sign of potential risks to human health. Sometimes we can smell certain chemicals in the air before they are at harmful levels. And community members have reported that smelling odors in the air can decrease the quality of life and sense of well-being. Odors from environmental sources might also cause health problems. In 2021, Johns Hopkins medical researchers conducted a study that found long-term exposure to airborne pollutants can increase one's risk of losing their sense of smell by nearly twice. So that's double the risk of losing your smell when you have long-term exposure to those airborne pollutants. This study was conducted primarily with individuals living in cities with high exposure to air pollution. Although not as immediately apparent and disabling as something like the loss of sight or hearing, anyone who has an impaired sense of smell or an absent sense of smell can explain just how much this contributes to the human experience. People with reduced smell have a hard time tasting their food. They are also less able to detect warning smells such as odor of spoiled food or natural gas leak. And changes in regulation to air polluting emissions, which are going on, are the best solution to minimize the impacts to smell created by living in an air polluted area. Looking at taste. Water is essential. It's an essential part of the environment that's needed for drinking, bathing, and cleaning. Although the United States water supply is generally safe, water can be contaminated in a variety of ways, such as through agricultural practices, sewage leaks, or naturally occurring substances like disease pathogens. Water quality can be affected by several natural and built factors, which can lead to health disparities. An example of this would be the location and size of a water source, city planning decisions, and the amount of the resources dedicated to managing the water system. All of those can influence a community's water quality. These factors, they may be more likely to adversely affect certain communities. Several studies have found that communities with lower incomes and communities of color have a higher risk of exposure to water quality health violations and water contaminants such as lead. Around the world, better water, sanitation, and hygiene could prevent the deaths of 297,000 children under the age of 5 years old every single year. So that clean water really does make a difference. All right, looking at touch. Chemicals are an important part of nearly every workplace, from specialized industrial chemicals to everyday cleaning products. Coming into contact with chemicals commonly used in workplaces can lead to a variety of short and long-term health effects. These health effects depend on the type of hazardous substance and the level of exposure, the concentration, and how long you were exposed. A hazardous substance can be inhaled, splashed into eyes, or onto your skin, or swallowed. Some of the possible health effects can include poisoning, nausea, vomiting, headache, skin rashes, and the rashes can appear like dermatitis. You could also see chemical burns, birth defects, and disorders of the lungs, kidney, or liver. These chemical exposures in the workplace are regulated by OSHA, but employees must also play a role in preventing exposure, wearing protective gear, wearing that protective gear correctly, and minimizing contact or time spent around a substance, and of course, following all safety protocols. Moving on to our ears. Did you know that noise is in your environment and the noises that are around you are considered a pollutant? Noise pollution refers to the increased exposure of human-made noises. These are things like traffic, construction, mechanical sounds, maybe your neighbor's radio. Some studies have found that noise pollution disproportionately affects communities of color and communities of lower incomes. Exposure to persistent noise pollution can cause stress, high blood pressure, sleep disturbances, and heart disease. The most common problem noise pollution causes is noise-induced hearing loss. Noise-induced hearing loss can result from a one-time exposure to a very loud sound or a blast, or you can get that hearing loss from listening to loud sounds over an extended period of time. While the best solution to protecting your hearing would be to live in a quiet area, this isn't accessible to everyone. So let's look at how you can reduce sounds on the things that you can control. These would be things like your personal headphones or speaker systems, and use hearing protection or protective devices when it's not feasible to avoid exposures to loud sounds or reduce them to a safe level. So things like headphones, earplugs, when you're going to be in one of those very loud environments. For individuals with an Apple Watch, we encourage you to download the Noise app and enable monitoring the noise around you. The app actually detects when the decibel level has risen to a point where your hearing could be affected, and it will notify you with a little buzz or a tap on your wrist. Super useful. Policy level change and environmental protections implemented at the local, state, and federal levels. These are all necessary to ensure that polluters are held accountable and to make changes that benefit the entire environment and all of us people living in it. Released by the United States Department of Health and Human Services every decade since 1980 is something called Healthy People. It identifies science-based objectives with targets to monitor progress and focus action on improving human health. One of the priority areas of Healthy People 2030 is neighborhoods and the built environment. Some of the targets in this area include increasing the proportion of people whose water supply meets Safe Drinking Water Act regulations. The Healthy People is also working towards reducing the amount of toxic pollutants released into the environment, reducing blood lead levels in children, reducing hearing loss due to noise exposure, and plenty more. So while we discussed many of the negative impacts poor environmental conditions can have on health, we also want to recognize that there's a significant amount of work that's being done in the environmental health sector to ensure that conditions are improving and not worsening as time goes on.
So you might be asking yourself, well, what am I supposed to do about it? Especially when so many of these changes are happening at the policy or government level. But remember, this presentation is titled The Environment and You, which means that you can take action for the environment as well. So how to get involved? This could look like contacting your local representatives, organizing or participating in a community cleanup. You can do this with your workplace, with your neighborhood, with your church, anywhere that you have a community. This looks like supporting public lands, educating yourself and others. So if this is something that interests you, we're going to have some resources in a few slides that you can learn more for yourself. Getting involved can also look like making green home improvements, which this could look like testing your basement for radon, removing lead paint, using a water filter, installing energy efficient light bulbs, all kinds of things. This next bullet point is a huge one. Buy less. Overconsumption is a huge driver of pollution and climate change. So simply by buying less, I promise you, you don't need everything that is advertised to you, no matter how enticing it looks. That is a huge way to become environmentally active. And then lastly, just as a suggestion, using eco-friendly and recycled materials in your home when you can, when possible. So while we've covered a lot of different types of pollution and environmental exposures that can affect your health, this is not to say that you shouldn't get outside and enjoy the natural environment around you, especially as we're moving into spring and with beautiful weather hopefully coming our way. Being outside in green spaces supports an active and healthy lifestyle, and it's been shown to increase life expectancy, improve sleep quality, and even reduce cancer risk. So along with supporting physical wellness, nature also bolsters mental wellness. There's many mental health benefits associated with being outside in green spaces, including a lower risk of depression and faster psychological stress recovery. So different studies have shown that being in nature can even restore and strengthen our mental capacities, increasing focus and attention. So in short, get outside, spend some time in the fresh air, and if you don't have fresh air around you, remember, call your local representatives. Now, if you are interested in learning more, we have some resources on this slide. So first up is a book called The Poison City by Anna Clark. This is about the Flint water crisis. If you're in the state of Michigan, this could be of special interest to you. The next book is called Waste by Catherine Coleman Flowers. This is a memoir about the intersections of environmental and racial justice in the rural United States. This third book, called Toxic Communities by Dorcetta E. Taylor, this focuses on the impact of pollution in low-income minority neighborhoods. I can personally vouch for this book. It's incredibly eye-opening and a really powerful read. So if you're interested, go ahead and pick that up. And then lastly, there is the TED Climate Podcast. These are short, only 10-minute episodes, and it talks about different systemic issues that contribute to climate change. And now, as you have, listened to this presentation, you can ask yourself this reflection question. What would a healthy environment look like to you? And what steps can you take to help achieve that environment? So just go ahead and reflect on this question with everything that we've talked about today. And I hope that it brings you some insight. And that is all. Thank you for joining us for our monthly webinar today. Our next webinar on May 31st is all about allergies. I'm sure, which by the end of May, we will all be very affected by that topic. So join us next time to learn more. Thank you.
If you want to register right now, there is a QR code on the screen, so feel free to scan that with your phone and tune in next May. Thanks, everyone.